All right, we're officially a minute past the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fall 2024 Market Trends webinar hosted by Skanska USA Building. My name is Sarah Vakili, and I'm the Senior Director of Business Planning and Strategy. I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. And usually I'm coming to you from New York, but I happen to be in Houston, Texas this week. So love to hear who all has joined us. Let us know in the chat and where you might be joining us from. This webinar is meant to accompany Skanska's quarterly market trends report that covers the supply chain, material pricing, labor changes, and other construction-related indices. If you haven't been able to check it out, please do so after the session. I just dropped the link in the chat. And I'd like to introduce our amazing guest speakers that we have for today. First up, we have Kez.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kez Ganiting. It's great to be here today. I am a National Strategic Supply Chain Manager here at Skanska USA Building, and I'm part of a national team. We support Skanska projects across the U.S. Thank you.
Thanks, Kez. And next we have Greg.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Ayers, President and COO of Knox Group Companies. We're a construction enterprise specializing in industrial, mechanical, electrical, and process systems.
Thanks, Greg. And Adam.
Yep, Adam Cheney, Senior Vice President for Corbin's, for the self-perform electrical arm of the Knox Group.
Thank you, Adam. And last but not least, Colleen.
Hi, I'm Colleen DeMark. I'm a pre-construction director out of the Metro Philadelphia office for Skanska. So I handle electrical estimating duties in this region.
Great, thanks, Colleen. So for our agenda today, we are first going to hear from Kez on the latest of the supply chain, and then I'm going to provide a brief construction industry snapshot. And then the bulk of our time, we're going to hear from our panelists and deep dive into the world of MEP. If at any point you have a question for our speakers, please add it into the chat. I see you guys dropping in comments in there now. And we are hoping to save time at the end of this webinar to address them. If we can't answer your questions in the time that we have allotted, I promise you we will follow up with you directly. One caveat is that we received a number of questions in advance about the potential tariffs that we're reading about in the news and their impact. The Skanska team is monitoring this very closely. However, we are not going to address tariffs today, as it would all be speculative on our part. So we do plan on holding a specific webinar early next year dedicated to this topic, where we'll provide our analysis and advice once there are more concrete details on what the tariffs might be and their timelines. So now I'd like to turn it back over to Kez from the supply chain team.
Thank you, Sarah. So if we look at the next slide. All right. So as Sarah mentioned, this slide is going to cover information from our market trends report. We're not going to be looking at tariffs on this slide. So this is a snapshot of the information that we collected for our fall trends report. So a lot of you who've joined the webinar before are familiar with this slide. What do we expect? What are we anticipating to happen with material costs, availability? What are the lead times? So I'm just going to step through this slide here left to right and just highlight some of the things we're seeing. So if we look first at architectural interiors, typically the lead times and pricing there has been stable. The only real issue that we have flagged in this category is mineral wool. On our last market trends report, we had reported that lead times were between 16 and 30 weeks. Good news is that lead time has kind of tightened up. Lead times are still extended, 20 to 24 weeks, but those lead times have dropped. And we actually anticipate seeing this extended lead time for mineral wool decreasing further to about 10 weeks over the next few quarters as demand stabilizes, with supply. If we go over to the roofing products, Materials here are readily available. Lead times are holding steady at around 5 weeks, and pricing is pretty stable. When we look at HVAC equipment, we've got an increase anticipated for lead times. Lead times vary by category of specific equipment, but in general, the trends are between 24 and 52 weeks. Of course, we've previously reported extended lead times on air-cooled chillers. That's driven largely by demand out of data centers. Those are seeing extended lead times still of 25 to 50 weeks. I'd also just like to highlight that water-cooled chillers are also having extended lead times. We're talking around 29 to 49 weeks there. We are anticipating prices to increase as well over the next 6 to 12 months. One thing to look out for in this category is lead times could push out further if interest rates do come down a little and demand continues to increase. Looking at electrical gear, obviously this is an important topic for this webinar today. I wanted to highlight 2 key types of equipment. We are seeing extended lead times still between 52 and 80 weeks generally for gear, but we've got those 2 highlighted categories there. We got generator sets. Those are running between 59 and 120 weeks for the 2 megawatt generators. So I just wanted to give a bit of an example here when we're talking about 2 megawatt generators, right? So take your typical data center. These data centers are all requiring a lot of generators. A 48 megawatt data center is going to require 24 2 megawatt generator sets on there. When you look at the consumption of that per year, we're talking over 420,000 megawatts consumed per year. And to put that in a perspective of, let's say, residential demand for electricity, the average household, with a rough estimate, consumes about 11,000 kilowatts per year. So if we multiply that out, one 48 megawatt data center is using the same amount of power as roughly 40,000 households each year. So these are huge pieces of equipment. Lead time is pushing out, over 2 years for some of these. And then the other type of equipment I wanted to highlight was transformers. So with all this demand for all this increased electrification, we're seeing the infrastructure is needing to be put in place to support these huge projects. So there's incredibly high demand for transformers. We're seeing lead times of 60 to 85 weeks on those, and we do not anticipate that to reduce anytime soon. So then over to wood material, lead time there, relatively stable. Price is anticipated to be pretty stable there. Structural steel, again, stable. And actually, pricing is a little down due to muted demand. And the last category is plumbing. Again, lead times is stable. We're anticipating a minor price increase. So that's what the general outlook is. So just, keep these challenge categories in mind when you're looking at projects. Our team is here to help you. We can provide detail. We can get you accurate forecasting. So just feel free to reach out. If you have questions, we're here to help. And then lastly, just to sum up, as Sarah said, we're not talking about tariffs here. This is our outlook for the fall report, and we'll have a lot more information for you on our next webinar. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kez. And again, if you have a question for our supply chain team, let us know, drop it in the chat. And now we are going to talk a little bit about the construction industry as a whole before we dive deeper into MEP. So I'd like to take a few minutes and consider the state of US construction spending. And we're going to begin by looking at this graph, which shows annualized seasonally adjusted construction spending in the US. And this is the latest figures as of October. In the US, we spend about $2.1 trillion on construction per year. So here's how that looks. The start date here is January 2008. Now let's parse this out between residential and non-residential spending. It kind of looks like this. So the green here is non-residential. That includes everything from building, infrastructure, transportation, and then residential includes single-family residential as well as multifamily residential. In October of 2021, non-residential and residential spending were about equal. So each was $840 billion in spending. But since that date, residential spending has only grown about 12%, while non-residential spending has grown 45%. In fact, given high interest rates and slowed residential growth, spending in residential has declined from its peak in May 2021. So we're still not back to our highest point. Now let's think, and Kez kind of mentioned it, what is driving that non-residential construction growth? Well, I think an obvious answer might be data centers. So construction spending in data centers has, of course, escalated. We read about it every day, and we find ourselves talking about it often on these webinars. And it actually constitutes more than a third of office-related construction. So the US Census Bureau actually puts data centers in office or commercial spending. And Oxford Economics has said that data center construction has grown 46% year over year just from 2023. Similarly, manufacturing spending has also skyrocketed. This has doubled since 2022, and again, driven by AI, investments in semiconductors, electronics, batteries, electric vehicle manufacturing. So we're seeing, again, a huge increase in non-residential construction. Now, finally, I'd like to layer in the construction labor workforce. So this is that original spending graph, including residential and non-residential, along with how many construction employees there are in the United States. Right now, there are about 8.3 million construction workers in the US. But according to the ABC, which is the Associated Builders and Contractors, the industry needs an additional 500,000 workers just in 2025 to meet our existing labor and spending demands. So that really means that our industry is pretty much operating at or honestly above capacity with the labor that we have. And as you saw that shift before, we are in the midst of a transformation. Because while certain sectors are booming and others are lagging, we have a very complex landscape and probably a lot of change ahead. Because if we see a revival and lower interest rates, sectors like multifamily housing, commercial, perhaps even more infrastructure spending might intensify pressures on our industry. And again, we have that critical demand for skilled labor. Buildings are becoming more complex and they're getting even bigger. I actually just read this morning in an FMI report that mega project spending is going to increase 30% through 2028. And I'd say perhaps no other part of our industry feels this complexity and change more than the electrical and mechanical market. Again, projects are becoming bigger, more complex, and more technologically advanced. So I'd like to dive deeper into the world of MEP and welcome back Colleen, Greg, and Adam. And we're going to get started. So thank you again for joining us. Colleen, I'd like to start with you. How have you seen projects evolve from an electrical perspective? Specifically, have you seen the cost of electrical work growing at a faster rate than other trades?
So is the cost of electrical work growing faster? I think everybody here has some kind of a battle scar or a story about electrical work in the last 4 years because it's been a crazy ride. It's been a rough time to be associated with electrical work, and I guess the short answer is yes, and it is growing faster and at a much increased pace. Skanska actually, we noticed this and we really wanted to understand what that escalation increase was. Over, say, what we see in ENR, really what we were seeing in the electrical mechanical trades. So we kind of went back into our archives and we pulled information on labor, material, commodity information, equipment pricing for the last 10 years. So that's the beauty of being able to kind of go back and pull out information from the past. So we evaluated all of this and we did a study on what the escalation is just for MEP trades. And we found is it's been substantially more than, say, the ENR average, which takes into account more of the architectural items. specifically for the time frame January 2020 to January 2024. Just on the electrical side, escalation was 10% higher than the ENR average. HVAC was 25% higher. So again, when we start looking at those numbers, we start saying, we really have to understand how we look at jobs and look at pricing and look at things moving forward. But just that information, I don't think tells the whole story of what really is going on with our industry, and why there's so many stressors. You had touched on some of them, but it's really rooted in, kind of how we work and how it's changed in the last 30 years. So I think everybody on this call would say, a building built in 1980 and 1990 does not look like a building that gets built today. Buildings responded to society's switch to more technology-based working. We got rid of our plan tables. We all got computers, as well as I think this is the time that was really, we started thinking about sustainability, and being more mindful of that. So the shift made our buildings and our construction a lot more complicated, more technically dense. So that shift to sort of that cloud computing, and now AI really stressed our market. And it made us experience a spike in equipment and material costs, especially during the pandemic. There was a scarcity, lead times went up. Now we're seeing some of the prices start. I'm not going to say they're going down. They're leveling, I think. And I think lead times are becoming more predictable. I'm not going to say that they're better, as everyone has seen. But what we're really starting to see now is that there is that shortage of skilled labor. And I want to highlight skilled labor. The people who work in these buildings, again, they're very technologically driven buildings, and they require a skilled labor force to work on them. And it's something we're really seeing a lot of these markets struggling with. And that's one of the cost drivers that we're seeing.
Yeah. I think we'll touch more on skilled labor too, with Adam and Greg, but do you, Greg or Adam, have anything else to add on the cost of electrical?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would go off what Colleen said, right? It's a different labor force than we needed in the past, right? Where it's changing, like you said in your slide earlier, from the residential to the more advanced manufacturing, heavy industrial, which takes a more skilled labor than we needed in the past, right? So that's driving up cost. And as the market changes, especially, Corbin's is focused on, data centers, semiconductor market. It's the speed to market. It's, we're doing jobs that, were 2 to 3 years long are now done in 12 months. So you need a lot more people in a short period of time. And it's not just bodies, it's skilled laborers that know how to do all these technical projects. And I would say the other thing, it's really regional based. Before, where you could kind of the same cost throughout the country, we're seeing it very regional based, just because there's an influx of work in different areas.
Great. So then to follow up on that, when we think about cost, how much of the cost is attributed to equipment and materials versus labor, and how does that play into risk factors here for you all, Adam and Greg?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, especially in the mission critical space where a lot of the, equipment is bought by the owner as OFCI, we don't see those costs on our project, right? The driver for us really is the labor and having, the correct amount of people for the work, because, before it was, a handful of, 3 or 4 years ago, it was a handful of data center jobs. Now in the Phoenix market alone, there's 30 to 40 ongoing projects at one time. So it's just to get the number of people in these certain areas, it's really the labor factor that's driving the cost.
Great.
And I would say kind of materials, they, like I said, they spiked, to Colleen's point, during the pandemic. I think for us, a lot of our commodities have leveled off since then. We had a big rise a couple of years ago, but, have leveled off. I still won't say they're going down, to Colleen's point, but I think they really have started to level off. But for us, it's more of a lead time than it is the cost. Back to, Kez's point earlier, the lead times are really what's driving these jobs. It's not necessarily the cost of the equipment.
Awesome.
Yeah, and what we see here and I'll speak to the Northeast, is it's a much different shift between equipment and labor and labor costs. We have a much more, I think, balanced, whereas in some other markets, there is a much higher labor risk because of the labor rate difference.
Right. And I want to mention, because I think we say this again in every market trends webinar, that price escalation might be coming down, but historically construction prices themselves never come down. So we have to, differentiate between escalation and actual cost. Unfortunately, we often do not see costs come down. All right, Greg, I do want to go deeper into the MEP labor force, changing competencies for craft workers. What challenges are you seeing? What strains are you seeing? Is there any good news? Can you talk about any programs that you all have as well?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great subject. As far as the competencies of the craft, for Knox Group, we've actually created our own workforce training development program, and I think a lot of other MEP trades, are doing the same. And it's not just training individuals on tools and how to use tools and how to work safely and how to watch out for one another, but it's truly advancing their growth for their own personal growth for their families and workforce. So what we're seeing is the more robust the training is, the more lifelike, almost game time situation where anybody can perform a task when it's in a controlled environment, and there's people looking over your shoulder helping you do the steps. But for us, our training starts in a controlled environment, but it continues out into the field because, as Adam and Colleen said, we're getting more and more finite on our resources, where our training is our construction. So that requires us to have additional supervision. So as we see costs going up, one thing that doesn't get discussed a lot, and it's regardless of the industry, whether it's commercial, whether it's heavy industrial, whether it's even residential, we're seeing indirect costs. We're seeing the GC costs, the amount of resources it takes to manage the workforce, gaining and getting larger. And we feel a lot of that has to do with everybody's training, everybody's working. So our workforce program has helped us keep up with the scalability of the market. It's helped us drive down our EMR. Our safety is at an all-time high, which is great. Our rework is at an all-time low, and we attribute a lot of that to that workforce. So that's a bright spot, and I think we're in a very large peer group throughout the U.S., and we're seeing that starting to pop up throughout the country, which is really encouraging for our industry, because there's plenty of work for everybody. So I think we feel we have a fiduciary duty to not only support our resources, but help support the industry to make the industry better. So we've got a lot of good things, I think, coming out of that. Some of the challenges, as Colleen and Adam touched on earlier, geographical markets. There's hot spots, there's warm spots, and then there's some cold spots. And what we're seeing is, as these hot spots really produce a long backlog of work for craft, we're seeing an excess of resources kind of running to those long-term markets, specifically around advanced manufacturing. So data centers, semiconductor, heavy industrial. Typically, we're seeing higher wages there, which then can create strains on, commercial projects or municipal work. Our cities, our states still have projects they have to build. So we're seeing a strain on commercial projects, and then because of the dollars just aren't there to support the wage scale. So as that comes up, what we've had to do is really work through, mergers and acquisitions. We're looking, where do our people want to live? We're really trying to provide the best environment, not only work environment, but mental health environment for our resources. And that alone has really changed our approach on how we look at work and who we work for. Is, we want our people to go home every night like everybody does. But we're trying to get even deeper into what can we do to keep them happier, what keeps them here longer, what helps grow our brand and our culture. So a lot of different things are coming into it that we're noticing the labor workforce is gravitating more. It's not just the Gen Zs or the Xers wanting the thing. Our craft, we're 2,000 employees and 1,600 of them are craft. So that's what drives our business, and that's where we put our focus around. But a lot of good things, a lot of bright spots for the industry as a whole. It's a little chaotic right now is all.
Yeah, I actually see a few questions, if you don't mind. around skilled labor traveling region to region. Do you have any comments there on travelers specifically for MEP?
Yeah, so we've right now about 40% of our workforce are what we would consider travelers, meaning we have employees in I think 13 different states that work. We're primarily a Southwest regional, so we call it the Southwest Six. So we're in the four corner states, Nevada and Texas is where Knox Group focuses, but we have resources from over a dozen states coming in. So traveling for us is part of our world because we target very large MEP programs. So we target projects that have anywhere from 400,000 up to 1 million man hours. Job sites that will have 400 to 500 craft on site. So we target big programs. So the ability to ebb and flow, not every project starts and finishes perfect in our world. So we've got a lot of overlap. But we have full-time staff that help our people relocate their families. That's one thing that's been a big game changer for us in the last few years is we have a dedicated team within our talent development group that helps our resources land in a new environment, a new city, helps the families get situated for schools. A lot of those little things make it easier for us to travel. The days of going to Billy, Bobby, Sarah, and say, I know it's Friday, but I need you in this city, in this state on Monday. Those
Yeah.
days are long gone. We need to be more accommodating to the workforce as an industry to help support that. But a lot of travelers for us, like I said, we don't see that number ever coming down. But it comes with per diems, there's incentives, there's more than just your normal wage when you have that many people.
Traveling.
Yeah, and I guess, Greg, another thing that we've helped to offset some of the labor needs, right, is we also have a separate company, Knox Innovation, for our prefab. We do a lot of prefab that offsets our labor needs. We've been able to reduce anywhere between 30 and 40% of the craft needed for a project just by prefab.
That's helpful. I think we did see, the question about prefab in the chat too. All right, switching gears just a little bit, Colleen, Skanska regularly shares what we see as the availability and cost of major electrical equipment, just like Kez provided at the beginning of this. And we're seeing lead times grow. As someone who regularly advises and estimates on costs for clients, how can you share ways that we specifically manage these challenges or the ways that we communicate to clients to help them with these issues?
So at Skanska, again, I do pre-construction. So I work with clients from conceptual, through GMP. And this is really a hot topic for all of us. We kind of see it on there. I just actually reached out to my generator manufacturer and got, from 30 weeks to 150 weeks. And having that kind of information is something that is helpful to our clients as they're beginning their design processes early. And I think a couple of things when it comes to dealing with electrical equipment is I feel better now that the information I'm getting from a lot of our vendors is they're going to be able to make a lot of those dates. Not all of them, but it's not, I think the days of us getting our projects pushed out 26 weeks, hopefully, are gone. But during our early phases, what I really like to do when I talk to lead time, when I talk to designers and owners, is really talking about what can we do to maybe pre-purchase material, get early packages out. Again, in some parts of the country, it would be getting a partner on board very early so that they can handle some of this early procurement. That's something that we do, kind of locally in the Northeast is very big to have a lot of pre-purchase. I think, again, in other parts of the country, it's getting a design partner on board so that they can be part of that early discussion. And I think it also, ties into what Greg and Adam had said. By partnering early, you also start to mitigate some of that labor because you're on their, they're part of your team, and they can plan and they can get the right manpower onto your jobs. So that's something I think that is one of the ways that we can certainly help mitigate some of these risks. The other thing I want to bring up is something about, working with our designers and our owners to even kind of change design or tweak design based on the lead times we're seeing. And a great example of that would be something like a generator. So if a generator right now, that's a 2 meg generator, is 100 weeks. a 750 or 1000 kW generator might be 30 weeks. Do you look at doing 2 generators? It's going to be an increase in cost, but you're going to be your time to get it installed and operating is lower. So it's having those discussions early on with clients to see how can we change design to meet some of these aggressive delivery schedules that we have, and some of these more aggressive schedules by just changes in design. And that's important to make sure that we're on top of everything with our vendors to make sure that we have that information to share.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And kind of following up on that question, and I saw somebody else comment on this as well in the Q&A, how stable is the bidding climate for electrical work? How much does it vary by region or project type? And Colleen, I'll have you start since you have a lot of perspective for the Northeast, and then Adam and Greg, I'd like to turn it over to you.
I will say in the Northeast, and I would say that's pretty much from, say, like the Baltimore north, we're pretty stable. I would say we have good availability for labor. We've had good results on bidding. Contractors are still out there. We still kind of do have that traditional design, bid, build mentality. So, and it still is working in this market because we're not experiencing some of these labor kind of crunches that other parts of the country are. I would say we're not seeing that in the South, in the Carolinas, or out in the West, where we really are getting squeezed. And in fact, I say that even in the Northwest. So I think lots of other areas are really getting that squeeze, similar to what Greg and Adam had kind of outlined earlier.
Adam, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think she was spot on, right? I think it's really regional based, and I think the days of a low bid and getting 3 or 4 numbers, especially in the Southwest, you just won't get them anymore, right? Everybody's at their limits and capacity right now. So really, it's like I said, partnering with the right team so we can make sure we have the labor available for your project. But if we're waiting to bid a job and then wait a couple weeks to see if it's awarded, and it's that you're never going to have the labor, and that's typically where we kind of shy away from and don't even bid those jobs. We're looking for the right partners and the right teams to make sure that not only we have the labor, but the GC and the other trades, the whole project's going to be successful.
And would you say too, there's different wages or wage rates depending on the type of project? Like, are you seeing data centers command higher wages for electricians?
Yeah, I think just the advanced manufacturing in general, like I said, because you need more of a skilled labor force, and a lot of these owners with the speed to market are offering incentives and stuff that you don't see in the other industries that are also driving the rates up.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in because Adam, you said something really interesting. So there are incentives in a lot of these markets, and for everybody who's kind of not in that data center market but might have a job in a market that's hot with that, I mean, that's what your job's competing against. So it's really important early on to capture those costs within your cost model and in your budget, because as much as you don't want to hear it, that's your competition for craft workers, because it is so tight right now. So if you were used to paying someone, X dollars, you might be paying 20%, 30% premium, and we have to make sure that that's captured in your cost model early for when you go for funding.
That's great advice. And actually, I kind of want to end my set of questions on this, but I've seen a ton of questions on what I want to get to and a few others. So for all 3 of you, what is the advice that you have for project owners, particularly in the regions where the electrical workforce is experiencing so many challenges of a busy market, whether or not they're in the high tech or in a different, commercial residential market? Greg, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I would say, like anything, I would pick your team, start the process as early as you can. That for us, what seems to be a big impact to driving on labor and cost is, last minute, things get put off until then it's a fire drill, and then things, costs get really expensive and trying to find people. So for us, we're looking for stable growth. We're looking for an alignment of values. I think as an owner, whether it's a municipal owner, a private owner, a corporate, that, like we've talked on this entire session, there's a lot of work out there we're spending a great deal of time lining our values with our customer and our client. So we look at, our customer, and this is a lot is with Skanska. So, we've done a lot of work, our values, our corporate structure, what's important to us as humans is very aligned. We're taking that a step further and who is the client, who's the ultimate owner of the program. And because when we have values that are aligned with one another and we understand what's important to each of us, what's going to make the project successful, we tend to see those be more successful. So I would be as an owner, I would be a little more open and forthright on what is important to me as an owner, not just price and schedule, but the tangible things of, is it a happy place? Is it a good place for workers that want to be there? We see a lot of craft drive past a lot of projects to go work down the street because they hear this site is unsafe or the work conditions aren't the greatest, the bathrooms are dirty, the site's a mess. Those are tangible things that craft and owners like me that we look for is the site clean? Is the client, participate in the project? Are they there on appreciation lunches? Little things like that mean a lot. Because the days of we're going to get 2 or 3 or 4 bids on a scope, I think are kind of part of the past, at least right now. And like I said, I know a lot of the participants on this are public, is really evaluate your contracting strategy, your method, change your legislation, to have a scheme at risk model, an EPC design build. I think having flexibility, because there's not a one size fits all for our industry anymore. So really figuring out what are the things that move the needle for you as an owner, and be open to ideas that may be challenging the status quo of, well, we've done hard bid for 25 years and that's just the way we do it. I think that's at times it's good to take a fresh look at things and make sure you're putting value at what's important to you, and then making sure that your builders, your subcontractors understand that.
I think it underscores there is no one size fits all procurement. I mean, some of the for every project has sort of its sweet spot, whether it's a design build, whether it's design assist, whether it is CM at risk or rip and read. But tying into this, I think I actually loved the talk about like having a good job site, because I think that's super important. People notice those things, and people do want to work on a safe site. And I think that's something that we always have to keep to the forefront as construction managers or as owners or as designers. What can we do to make it safer? And then by that measure, a more a place where people want to be. But I did also want to touch on one other thing on procurement, one other strategy we might look at, especially in some of those markets where we actually are still doing bidding. You really want to look at breaking your projects down into smaller pieces. I know there's a lot that goes on with that. But we've got some of these mega projects, and asking a single contractor to take on that type of risk really does limit the pool of people that you can have bid your project. So taking a look at how can you break it down really can benefit your project, not only from a craft worker standpoint, but also if you have DE&I goals, or if you have local participation goals, you may be able to meet some of those a little bit easier as well.
Great advice. Adam, anything else to add to this topic?
No, I think Greg and Colleen did pretty well. I mean, I guess for us, our big thing is, before we were looking 3 to 6 months out in our labor forecast. We're now, committing to programs, 12, 18 months in advance. So it's not the day of, like I said, just waiting for the next job to come out and bid it and find the resources. We're planning a year in advance and committing to owners and projects early. So I think, especially in the mission critical, these program builds where there's multiple buildings on a site, and we commit to a program that's going to be, 3 or 4 years long, then we can commit the resources. So.
Yeah. Great advice. I think, in general, what I hear you all saying is, again, don't rely on the status quo or historical past experience, because we are in a different industry setting. And again, that transformational shift that I talked about earlier than we were before. So I think what worked and what has worked in the past is not quite what it's going to be in the future, as the construction landscape has changed and there's just different things happening. So I appreciate all of your input. We do have a lot of questions. So everyone, if you'll hang on, we're going to answer as many of these as possible. And I'm going to also bring up some that were submitted beforehand. So Colleen, can you give us a little bit more detail on why lead times for electrical switchgear and chillers and air handling units are so long?
So I think the electrical industry, and I'll speak to the electrical industry. I know chillers and air handling units have something similar, but really switchgear and generators and transformers, because we've had this systemic shift in what we're doing as a society, data centers, AI, EV, electrification, decarbonization. All of those have hit us kind of at one spot. And I think the pandemic sort of, it really just kind of hit that breaking point. A lot of the manufacturers got caught off guard. There were a lot of supply chain issues. I think a lot of these manufacturers have taken a look again and opened new facilities. They are in the process of diversifying their supply chain, regionalizing their supply chain. But again, this is an industry that's, some people are saying is gonna quadruple in the next, 5 years. So I don't know that anybody can keep up with that type of demand. And then also no one knows when the bottom's going to fall out. So how much do you increase your manufacturing capacity, knowing that someday you have to reach a point where it's leveled. So it's kind of the hand that we're dealt right now. And I think early planning and pre-planning is kind of our best defense against this. We can't bury our head in the sand. It's here to stay.
Yeah. I saw the question both in the chat and it was submitted beforehand, but someone mentioned that lump sum pricing has been very competitive, and this person happens to be in the Mid-Atlantic region. Are we deflating? I think we've all discussed this, that the answer is probably not deflating. But
yeah, I don't think we're deflating in the Northeast. I think we have contractors that have capacity. We have a very skilled workforce, and there are people that are ready to work and have the ability to work, and we have contractors that still have availability. That is not Skanska operates throughout the U.S., and that is not what we see in the bulk of our other markets. Again, the South, we have had jobs where we've begged people to bid, and it is a very real thing. The need to partner early or to get people on board early as part of a teaming agreement, it is very real in a lot of parts of the country. So in the Northeast, maybe we're not seeing that, but definitely I would say in other parts of the country. And Adam and Greg, I think you're feeling it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're seeing, like I said, a move to not only the South and Southwest, but to other areas that weren't had a big construction boom before are now booming, right? The Ohio's, that Rust Belt that was big in the 70s and 80s is now getting back up booming again, right? So we're seeing new areas really pop up outside of our traditional big areas, California, the Northeast. We're seeing a lot of different areas throughout the country really start to grow.
Another question that we received earlier were about projects wanting to be more sustainable. We've seen a lot of trends in electrification. Are there specific challenges with electrification or focusing on more sustainable projects specific to our conversation?
I think that electrically, when we talk about sustainability, we've already done some incredible things. When I started, we had T8 and T12 fluorescent lights. So, I mean, everything's an LED now. That's cut a huge amount of power out of a building. But on almost every project, especially public sector projects, we do see an ask, actually a lot of higher eds as well, to the push towards electrification, kind of decarbonizing the building. So I would say when it comes to things like sustainability, there's always this push and pull between capital costs and operating costs. And so from a sustainability standpoint, sometimes some of the technologies that we put in will make a building more efficient. But it's a higher capital cost. So I think that is always a challenge we have in design and construction. Higher first cost to save operationally. But also when you talk specifically about electrification, I think if it's done early on in the project, we certainly can understand some of the efficiencies and some of the ways that we're going to save money on the HVAC side and have an increase on the electrical side. I think meeting efficiency, ASHRAE efficiencies can sometimes be a little bit of an issue with an all-electric building. Again, the technology is constantly changing. But in new construction, I feel like we can get there. It is maybe a little bit of a premium. In renovations, what we see is the building service isn't big enough. So we're now replacing a lot and if a client wasn't planning on replacing that, it can be a challenge.
Great. Adam, you mentioned this just briefly, but do you have someone asked, what are the trends we're seeing in prefab or modular? Anything you want to add here on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, we're prefabbing as much as we can in our group, and we have a lot of technology built into it. So, it starts with our modeling, right? We model for construction and prefab, and then we move into sheet sets, and all of our equipment in our prefab shop is tied to the technology. So we have automated cutting and all that kind of stuff to tie it to the model, which really reduces the time on site. So yeah, prefab is a big deal. But it goes back to, we keep bringing up this point, but early involvement. The earlier we can get involved and we can prefab. If, we're waiting and we don't have the equipment, we can't prefab stuff that we don't have.
Right.
The earlier we get involved, we can do modularization and prefab and really cut down on these schedules and labor.
Great, thank you. And then Greg, there's some follow-up questions when we were talking about the craft and skilled labor force. When we were talking about travelers, do you mean that they are physically relocating or are they traveling back from their sites to their homes on a regular basis? And then one more follow-up was, have you found places where you're recruiting new workers into the industry? And their example was like, would teachers make good electricians? Is there anywhere that we're recruiting from, perhaps?
Yeah, no, all great questions. So regarding the travelers, we have a mix. If we know of a project that's going to be long-term for us is 18 months and beyond. The long-term projects where we've had a high rate of success of just relocating the entire family. Obviously, families can be tricky depending on the age of the family and how much they're ingrained in schools and the environment, the community, and so we're constantly looking at that. But I would say the majority of our craft are what we call professional travelers. They come in, whether they take care of their own housing, whether it be travel, they're finding parks to stay in, they're renting apartments. They'll come in and work 2-3 weeks at a time, and then they'll go home for every third week or once or twice a month for a couple of days or a long weekend and come back. Something like that works well for their family arrangement. Others are, hey, I want to be here, I'm going to work, and then I'm going to take 2-3 weeks off every 6 to 8 weeks. So we've had to adapt. There's not a one size fits all on the travelers. Everybody has different situations. So we've got a mix. And that's why, like I said earlier, we have a group within our workforce development that they're there to help people manage through that, to make sure that we are providing the best situation for that individual. As it comes to our recruiting practices, same thing goes. We have a higher success of acquiring good quality individuals, and that's not just electricians. That's professional staff, that's superintendents, it's quality, it's safety, it's project managers, it's accounting, it's payroll, it's IT, it's the entire gamut of our business. When they see a long run of work and sustainability and to where they can make it, they're not having to find a new job every 6 months. That's probably been our biggest attribute to not only our low turnover. I mean, we're down in the really, really low, like 2-3% turnover, which is kind of unprecedented for a big MEP. And a lot of that's because we're in big markets. We can see a 3 to 5 year runway. So they're not changing jobs. But when it comes to right now, we recruit more on the individual, not so much the skill set. We truly believe we can teach the skill set from a craft all the way up to a project manager to process, invoices and accounting to IT. What we're looking for is the individual. We want the right person that has the right culture fit for us, has similar values, really wants to be part of the team, putting the team ahead of themselves. What we found is when we find the right individual, teaching skill set is a lot easier than having someone that's got great skill set but a bad attitude. And I use this term with my guys. I would much rather have a team full of veterans than a team of all-stars. All-stars don't have to work together. They're used to being the one in charge. I like veterans, that mindset of, hey, whatever the job's needed, that's what I'm willing to do. That's who we've surrounded our entire enterprise with, is that veteran mindset of whatever's needed, that's what I'm here for. And that has caught fire with us, and it's been a big change for us.
Awesome. I would tell everybody on this call, tell somebody to become an electrician. They have a bright future ahead of them.
Yeah.
And probably a lucrative one. All right, I think that was about all of the questions that I think are related to our topic. I do want to make one final comment that I think we didn't get to around the, as buildings have become more complex, and this is not just data centers and high tech, of course, they are much more complex. One thing we didn't discuss is the number of craft workers and especially electricians needed on a project. Adam, could you really quick touch on if you're thinking about project sizes? And I know we're saying projects that are sometimes bigger, or there's a lot to the program over a number of years, are more attractive. Can you give those of us on the call a thought about how big these are and how many people it takes to get these buildings done?
Yeah, I mean, it's growing crazy. I mean, some of these jobs, I mean, we're seeing a project here in Arizona, there's 12,000 craft on one job, right?
Yeah.
We're even, in a data center job where it was a 3-year job 4 or 5 years ago, that was, 80 to 100 craft electricians. Now we're at 300 to 400 plus, right? So it's not only the size of the project, it's the speed to market and the schedule. So the amount of craft needed has just exponentially grown in the past, I would say 24 months.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Just wanted to give everybody a little bit more context again, as you're thinking about your project and the kind of market that you're in. Take all of this into consideration. I think that about wraps up our time together. I want to thank Colleen, Adam, and Greg for their time, as well as Kez for giving us an update on the supply chain. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to me or one of us. You'll get a recording and the material that we shared shortly after we end this call. And I did see Steve Stouthammer, my colleague here at Skanska, who leads our pre-construction team, answering many of your questions. So thank you, Steve, for doing that as well. And thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.